Hi, we'll get started in a few minutes. I just want to check before we get started that people can hear me. If you can hear me, just reply in the chat box or the question and answer box that you can. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Like I said, we'll get started in a few minutes. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Statistics Solutions webinar on the literature review. A couple things before we get started. The webinar today and other webinars that we've given in the past are available on our website. They're archived, so you're welcome to go there, and look at those. Also, we do have a support person online to answer any like non-content related questions, any tech issues you have. Also, if you have questions as we proceed, that's fine. You can just, but I won't get to them until the end. But if you want to put them in the chat box, or if you want to put them in the question and answer box so you don't forget them, that's fine. But I just won't get to them until the end. Okay, I think that's it. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so our typically the literature review is chapter 2. This is based on the 5-chapter model of the social sciences dissertation, which is pretty standard. And the literature review is typically chapter 2. There are different models. Sometimes international schools will have more than 5 chapters. So you're going to hear me say this several times throughout the presentation. Always obtain your school's template for the dissertation, so you know exactly what they require. Having said that, though, there's a lot of common features and a lot of commonalities between the structure of social sciences dissertations, the expectations. There's a lot of similarities, so this will act as a general guide, which is good. But again, get your school specific template because there are sometimes differences. Okay. All right, this is what we're going to cover today: the introduction, the literature search strategy, theoretical framework, review of the literature, which is about 80%, which is most of the lit review, which is about 90% of the lit review, and a summary. Okay, and it's important to understand the purpose of the lit review before we get started on each individual section, to get your head around what it's doing in your study, what purpose it serves. Obviously, you're going to be reviewing research on your topic, specifically on your topic, to give us a sense of the research that's been conducted and the research that's relevant to your topic and what you're doing. But so it does help to provide some context. But the ultimate kind of purpose of the lit review is to not only to show what's been done, but it serves as a kind of argument, or it kind of supports the argument for your research problem. So in other words, you're reviewing the research, you're making some critical statements about analyzing it to some extent, but also where you get a chance, you want to highlight and reinforce your research problem, right? Your research problem may be a gap in the literature. It may be, that's one kind of research problem. It may be that, only a certain kind of research has been done on your topic, and you're going to do a different kind of research. So whatever the research problem is, your literature review in part should be kind of, help to push that, to drive that argument of why your study is needed. It shows what's been done, and consequently it highlights, and you should highlight throughout the literature review where you can, especially at the beginning, at the end, here's all the literature, the research that's been done on the topic. However, the research hasn't been conducted in this very specific area, which is what your whatever happens to be, which is what your study is designed to do. Okay, so that's kind of the overall purpose, the thing you need to keep in mind. So it's not just a review of the research. That's a big part of it, an analysis of the research, but also that push to help support the need for your study. Okay, so it starts out like all the chapters, starts off with an introduction, and the introduction is pretty pat. I mean, it restate basically the introduction reorients your reader, right? So restate the purpose of your study, remind the reader of why your study is important, why it's needed, remind them essentially of your research problem. And if you want, you can preview contents of the chapter, what's to come. Usually, again, check your specific school's template, but usually there's a section. Sometimes this is part of the introduction, sometimes it's a standalone section, but something that's called something like literature search strategy or methods of searching, something like that. Basically what it does, it shows your reader, it shows your professor that you've conducted a comprehensive search for material on your topic. So there's not stuff out there that you missed. So to show them, you want to describe your search, right? Start off by saying, you conducted a comprehensive search of the literature on your topic through, mostly nowadays, people are doing it through, online, through your university library's online portal. You want to list the databases and the search tools that you used. Search tools are things like Google Scholar, Academic Search Complete, Academic Search Premier. Most academic databases have those. Those are, search tools that search multiple databases. So you get a lot of coverage with those. Sometimes there's specific databases that you want to include in your search, specific to your area. So like if you're in education, ERIC, E-R-I-C is one of the big databases in education. So you would want to include that, for example, for an education. It depends on what you're doing. Search the major databases, make sure that you list that you search them. Include, sometimes there's specialized journals that are really big in the field that you may want to search. If you search those, you can include that. You want to include the key terms that you used in your search, and in their combinations. And these aren't anything mysterious. These are going to just include basically your variables, your factors, your major concepts, maybe your theory, but you want to list those. And another important little kind of subsection down here, any way that you filtered or any way that you qualified your search. So in other words, if you searched only English only articles that were published in English, you could put that. Important ones include full text, you can include that too. Really important ones are the last two here. Date of publication. And again, this is a place where you want to check your school's template, or even check with your chair. Some schools, for the lit review and for the entire study sometimes, but for the lit review, they want you to restrict the literature that you review to like certain publication date, like 5 years from the present. Some schools relax a little bit, 5 to 7 years. Some schools it's 10 years. Some schools don't have a requirement. So, check with your school's template. If there were some, publication restrictions, you want to include that. So if they say go back only 5 years or primarily 5 years, you want to include the primarily you searched material from the present going back 5 years or whatever it happens to be. Ideally, even if your school doesn't have requirements, ideally, I suggest sticking as closely to recent material as possible. Number one, it makes it easier for you. You don't have to go back 20 years. There's going to be a lot of stuff if you just open it up like that. The other thing is that the research, the review of the research, literature review, it's ideally a snapshot of recent literature on your topic. So, because that's what's relevant. You know, research from 15, 20 years ago is probably not going to be relevant. Now, there's a caveat there. Some studies are foundational. You know, like they got things started, or they still have relevance. If that's the case, you want to include it, and you can flag it that way. But usually there's not going to be so many of those. You want to keep things more recent, again, to show, you know, what's relevant now, or what's relevant has been relevant in the past few years. Again, you know, something from 20 years may have been done, or may not be relevant anymore. So keep data publication in mind. The other important one is qualification is that you restrict yourself only to peer-reviewed material. That's real important. And that is really the gold standard for the lit review. You want to include primarily peer-reviewed material, peer-reviewed scholarly, articles from scholarly journals, academic journals. Books are used, you know, you don't want to use books too much, maybe sparingly. Information from websites, again, sparingly, and I would only use website information if it was from like a government site or some kind of Department of Labor statistics, or, you know, something that provides you statistics, you know, like recent statistics on something. But you don't want to be reviewing kind of like literature from a website. So peer-reviewed academic journals, that's key. That's what you really want to focus on. And it's important to put that in your literature search strategy section, because it's important to show that you focus primarily on that research. And again, not a difficult section and usually pretty short, but like a lot of the sections of the dissertation, it's always helpful. I mean, use your resources, go to webinars, you know, do searches online, use your reference librarians. But sometimes there's no substitute for getting a good example, you know, like an approved dissertation from your school, close, you know, in your area, close to what you're doing, just to see what people have done, see how they've handled these sections. It helps you when you have something like that at hand when you sit down to draft. Okay, the theoretical framework or conceptual framework. It can be the next section in your lit review. Again, this is school dependent. So again, check with your school's template. Some schools want you to talk a little bit about the theoretical framework in chapter 1, and then also elaborate on it more in chapter 2. Some schools, the framework only appears in chapter 1. Some schools, it only appears in chapter 2. So again, you know what your school wants. If your theoretical framework does need to appear in chapter 2, let's talk a little bit about what's required there. First of all, theoretical framework or conceptual framework. You know, here's what I tell folks. It's just the easiest thing to remember for your purposes is theoretical frameworks are typically associated with quantitative studies. Conceptual frameworks are typically associated with qualitative studies. Usually for quantitative studies, when you're using instruments, say to measure constructs, those instruments have a theoretical base. So let's just take 2 examples. Let's take emotional intelligence and transformational leadership. So if you were measuring those constructs, you wanted to see if they're related. There are several instruments for emotional intelligence, for example. So if you're using Goleman's instrument, And it should, whatever instrument you use should be based on what you're trying to find out, what serves the purposes of your study. Just say you're using Goldman's instrument. Okay, well, his instrument has a theoretical basis, right? So the theory you would want to use for your theoretical framework should be Goldman's theory of emotional intelligence, because that's the instrument you're using. You see how that works? So you don't want to use, say, Goldman's instrument, but use Smith's theory, right? Because they're not going to align. Some of the components are going to be different. So again, use a theoretical foundations to align if you're doing a quantitative study with your instruments, because they all have theoretical foundations. They don't kind of just spring from nowhere. And so to kind of flesh out this example a little more, if you're doing a study on emotional intelligence and theoretical leadership, or transformational leadership, I'm sorry, that would really be your theoretical framework, the theory of emotional intelligence based on the instrument you're using, the theory of transformational leadership based on the instrument you're using for that, and a discussion of those two theories as they apply to your instruments would constitute your theoretical framework. So what do? You just basically start off with a statement that says, you know, Goldman's theory and so-and-so's theory of transformational leadership will serve as the theoretical framework for this study. You talk a little bit about who developed the theory, obviously have a source for it. Talk a little bit about what they develop the theory to explain, because that's what theories do, they explain things. You're going to want to define the theory. A lot of times people will talk a lot about the theory, but they'll never define it. That should come early. Define the theory, again, with using the theorist that's associated with your instrument. Along with include any associated components. Sometimes theories have components to them, different dimensions, include those. Define the components. You might want to discuss a little bit what researchers have used the theory for, other researchers besides just the person who developed it. And the big thing is to connect it to your study. How is it going to help explain what you're looking at? How does it connect to what you're doing? And that's kind of the idea of the theoretical framework. And again, if you have two constructs like emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, you would just have a discussion for each one, but in a discussion of the theory for each one. And those two things, those two theories together would constitute your theoretical framework. For conceptual framework, for qualitative studies, typically qualitative studies are more exploratory. So you don't have constructs that you're kind of measuring, you don't have things you're measuring. You're kind of looking to get, participants, the perceptions, dig into their experiences, get in-depth information, kind of really explore things. So sometimes there's not theories that will work directly with that. So you kind of use the major concepts of what the things you're looking at. And then you kind of put the concepts together to create a framework. That's why it's called a conceptual framework. And for qualitative studies, your conceptual framework helps guide your interview questions, right? When you sit down to draft your interview questions, because they can't come from nowhere. So your conceptual framework will help you guide those interview questions. Yeah, I see it. There's a question there. I'll get to it at the end. We'll come back to this. Okay, and again, check check approved dissertations for the theoretical framework section, because again, it's something that you can kind of, it may make sense to you as you're listening to a discussion of it or reading about it, but then when you sit down to actually draft it, sometimes it's a little bit different. Okay. Next is the review of the literature. This is the bulk of the literature review. This is where you actually you discuss the research on your topic. It includes analysis, it includes synthesis. We'll get to that in a minute. It includes some summary. It's always helpful because this will be, it's pretty long. And I know somebody's question might be, well, how long should a lit review be? Sometimes your school will give you a page account for it. Sometimes they don't. I've seen literature reviews that are 80 pages. I've seen literature reviews that are 10 pages. I know that doesn't help, but usually the sweet spot is 25 to 30 pages. So if that helps. So anyway, it's good. You're going to have a lot of material here. So you're going to want to subsection it, right? You're going to have subsections in here. It's going to help you as a writer to, to just kind of manage the information, because you're going to have a lot of studies, a lot of information. You're going to be overwhelmed if you don't kind of organize it. And the best way to do that is to section it out, subsections. It also helps your reader, because if you just have one big long section, your reader's going to get lost. And so how do you section it out? How do you organize it? Again, this isn't a mystery. The section should correspond to your factors, what you're studying, your variables, your factors, your major concepts. And just use these two as headers. Okay, like I said, reviewing the research consists of, not just summary, summarizing a little bit, describing what's in the studies, what they're about, but synthesis and analysis. So let's take those two separately. What is synthesis? Synthesis really generally is just combining two or more things to create a whole, synthesizing it. So the idea is to combine information from the studies to make your points. And the best way to do this is synthesize at the paragraph level. And sometimes people forget their kind of basic paragraph organizational strategy. They have paragraphs that they're all over the place, and it's understandable because you have a lot of information. It's going to be a challenge to kind of organize it. But if you kind of get a handle on things at the paragraph level, you'll be doing good. And just to kind of review, here's an example of synthesis at the paragraph level, and I've color coded everything for you here. You have a topic sentence, right? And I apologize if this is a lot of, kind of review and refresher, but it kind of helps, again, because there's so much material in the lit review. Topic sentence, right? That tells what the sentence is about. Evidence related to the topic or discussion, or things that illustrate the topic, what you're talking about, and then some kind of summary or transition sentence at the end. So let's just take a look. I'm going to read a little bit of it just so you can see the moves. Okay, so it says recent research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. Okay. And then the next, the material after that, highlighted in the green, is material from studies that reinforce that topic. And if you notice in that topic sentence, I say research has mostly, because when I get down to like the third example, Anders, where it says Phillips, where it says unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al., Phillips et al. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetic knowledge and glycemic control. Okay, so this is one. Research mostly supports this connection. And I have two studies supporting that connection, but this third one didn't. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetes knowledge and glycemic control. But then here's an explanation which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. Okay, so that study does not fit in with the other ones. It doesn't show the same thing, but there is a possible explanation, which is included. And then the wrap-up sentence, which is empirical evidence from recent research, largely supports, it's a qualifier, not all of it, but largely supports mostly, except for that one that didn't. And so that's an example of how you bring studies together and the findings together to make a single point. And this is an example of synthesis. This is part of what you want to do in your in the lit review. Okay, analysis. You also want to do some analysis, which is involves, you know, like anything else. Analysis is like evaluation. You're making comments about the quality of something. So any shortcomings or gaps in the studies you want to note. You also want to note any trends. You know, things that the research seems to be focusing on. And anywhere that you can, you want to reiterate your research problem and the need for your study. Because remember, the whole lit review culminates as an argument for conducting your study. You know, here's what the research has shown. Here's all the things the research has shown. But it hasn't covered this, which is what your study is designed to do. And if you notice, to go back, this would be oops, let me see. Okay. Sorry. The synthesis example here where I say the weakness in the one study, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. Now that's analysis and it's just worked in, right? So that kind of stuff, when you can make kind of, you know, comments like that, that constitutes analysis. So it's not, you know, analysis has to be a separate section or anything. It's just kind of as you go through and you see, you know, weaknesses like that in the study, you want to note it. As well as, you know, it requires some summary, right? Like, you know, what are the details of the study? What kind of study was it? You know, what was the purpose? What are the findings? The findings are very important. And then analyze where you can, you know, make comments where you can, and reiterate the need for your study where you can. You don't have to do it all the time, but where there are opportunities. Okay. And we're the summary. And I know we went over the review of the literature kind of quickly, but it's just really kind of getting in there, organizing the material based on your variables, your factors, and seeing what's in the literature, you know, in the recent literature, and synthesizing that material, putting in analysis where you can, putting in making a case for your research where you can. For the summary, like any summary, recap major points from the chapter. And this is important because if the lit review is culminating, you know, in an argument for conducting your study, the research problem, it's important, remind the reader of the research problem based on what's in the literature and what's not in the literature. In other words, what the literature covered and what it didn't cover, which is what your study is designed to do. Reiterate the need for your study. And don't do the fake summary, what I call the fake summary. It seems, I don't know what it is about introductions and summaries. In my experience, folks just they seem to just kind of fall down on the summary or fall down on the introduction. And it's, I know they're kind of, they may seem tedious, but they're not that difficult. Sometimes people will give a summary and it's like, in this chapter, I did this, and this, and they just kind of list the sections of the chapter. That's not a real summary. That's just a list of your sections. So make sure you do the things here, recap the points, and remind the reader of the necessity of your study. Okay, and this is our information, who we are, our contact information. If you want to reach out to see if what the support we provide is right for you, then please, it's a free consultation with no obligations. Okay, now I'll go to questions. Let's see. Webinar transcript, yes, in the above the URL above that post is where we archive the webinars, and you can find them there. Okay, okay, I have another one here. This goes back to the framework, I think. What if your dissertation is a mixed methods, quant and qual? Would you have both a theory and a conceptual framework? You could. I think it kind of depends. Sometimes mixed methods are primarily quantitative, and the qualitative portion is just to kind of add some clarification or some explanation to the quantitative portion. So in that case, I think just your theories for the quant portion would be fine. It just depends, I think, on how in-depth your qualitative portion is. You could probably, I think, get away with just having a theory for the quant portions. Again, it depends on how significant how big your qualitative portion is. But I don't think you would need a theoretical and a conceptual framework, although you might. And that's something to consult your chair about. So no hard and fast one answer for that. Okay, in this example you provided with transformational leadership and EI, could you give an example of your headings and subheadings for the lit review? What are some examples you would likely see in chapter 2? Well, that depends. I mean, they're all different, and all studies are different, and also the research that you're going to find is going to be different. So part of it would be, let's say for transformational leadership, if it has components, which I think it does, or even emotional intelligence, if it has components and you're studying those components, then your section on EI would probably be subsectioned out by those components, by a discussion of those components and the research that's on those components. You can also use subsections, develop subsections based on what's actually in the literature. So if you're talking about EI and there seems to be some trend in the literature that researchers are focusing on, you could use that as a subsection. So that would be dependent on what's in the literature. But I think for so either that, or like I said, the components of the constructs would be a good way to even, I mean, you can even go different levels of subsections. Like you have a subsection for emotional intelligence, then subsections under that for the components or for the trends that are in the literature. I hope that helped. How do you suggest articulating how the conceptual framework is comprised in your lit review? I'm not sure what that means. I mean, it would be similar to the theoretical framework in the sense of such and such concept or concepts, that would be what you're focusing on. Will comprise the conceptual framework for the study, and then you kind of go in and you define the concepts, and you talk about how they're related to what you're studying and how they will help guide what the information that you're looking to get. Yeah, so again, that's I hate to keep saying look at the samples, but they are helpful. but I mean, that's my kind of my general recommendations for that. Anything else? Everybody's good for the lit review. I know you're not. It's the lit review is challenging. I understand that part. But you can get through it, with some help with. And one thing I didn't mention, or maybe I didn't hit it very hard, but when you're doing the search, the literature search, use, if you need to, I mean, even if you think you're okay with a search, use your reference librarians from your university's library, that you can talk to them and consult them online. You don't have to call them. They have the online boxes that pop up. Do you need help? Take advantage of that, because it is part of the responsibilities of research librarians at academic libraries, is to help people, do research. They can help you with your search terms. They can help you navigate the databases. So take advantage of the assistance offered by your reference librarians at your school's library. Okay. Are all lit reviews more topical or chronological? A good question. And yes, they can be either. It kind of depends on what makes more sense for your study. Usually topical, I would say it's more topical, because you're either organizing it by topics, meaning your constructs and the components of your constructs, or the topics that are or themes that are in the literature, the recent literature. It can also be your organizational sections. So typically topical, but within so I'm going to say maybe both. So within that topic, right? So you have a topic, you have a section. Maybe then as you review the studies, you can have a chronological focus, but I would say largely topical, unless again there's a real reason why you should do it chronologically. And sometimes there's a case like that. If you want to show the development of something over time, you would go chronologically, but I think topically makes a lot of sense most of the time. All right, any other questions? And we do run these on different chapters, chapter 1, 3, 4, 5, and different topics, methods, and things. So, feel free to stop back by for other webinars, or make an appointment for a consult, see if what we offer is right for you. Again, no obligation. Okay, well, I want to wish everybody luck. I know it's a tough climb, but you can do it. In the lit review, and be hardened once you complete the proposal, the chapters 1 through 3, which is a tough climb. Typically, the 4 and the 5 go a little quicker and a little easier, but it doesn't mean you're out of the woods. It doesn't mean there's no more work. It just means that the proposals is a big, it's a big part of the push. All right, well, thank you for attending. I wish you all luck, and maybe I'll see you in another webinar, chapter 1 or chapter 5. All right, thank you.